Today marks 1 year since the federal government's initial response to the Royal Commission into violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disability. The Disability Royal Commission cost $600 million, and during the commission, people with disabilities relived the most harrowing and traumatic stories in the hope that it would lead to change. So what's happened since then? Well, not a lot, according to some disability advocates. It's expected that the government will give a more detailed response sometime later this year, but should we have seen much more action by now? River Knight is from Developing Australian Communities and is also a disability advocate who has some thoughts on this. River, always good to have you on the program.
Hi, thanks for having me. And we're very interested with the Disability Royal Commission. We saw, 7,944 submissions, held 1,785 private sessions, published 14 issue papers, made 17,824 phone calls and had 33 public hearings. And we found the economic impact of violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation costs Aussies $46 billion a year on top of the cost of NDIS, Medicare and Health. So one might think the urgency of actioning recommendations would be very high. Yeah,
absolutely. You'd think. Now, there were more than 200 recommendations made out of the Commission. How many of those have been actually endorsed and actioned by the government, River?
Well, since the Royal Commission, the government endorsed less than 10% of the 222 recommendations. They also seemingly forgot all the recommendations of the additional NDIS review that Bruce Bonner-Haiti did, a review that no one seemed to really need, understand or decide to use. And of course, our new minister in her maiden speech this week in Parliament didn't mention the Royal Commission at all.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm not sure. We seem to have this cone of silence, in the last 2 years and the years since they've responded in a small way. The phrase co-design seems to have disappeared from the mouths of ministers, which is probably why many of us have no idea what announcement is coming next. Legislation's changed. Now we see people being cut off NDIS and turned back to state services that don't exist and we have no plan for. And this was announced at the end of the current financial year that states had to include whatever foundational supports actually are into the hospital funding agreement because, of course, our hospitals have plenty of additional time and resources that don't force states, then that doesn't force states to sign up to something without pressure quickly, does it?
Given the seeming lack of endorsement and action on the recommendations out of the Royal Commission, I mean, a lot of people sort of point to Royal Commissions and say, we have them and then nothing happens. Why don't we make the changes that are recommended that people have taken the time and the trouble to actually sieve through? As you said, the enormity of this commission went for sort of really from woe to go, 4.5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, almost 5 years. And the biggest part of abuse, neglect, violence and exploitation is around safeguarding people. So safeguards recommended were a big part of the recommendations from the Royal Commission. They haven't been reintroduced back to pre-NDIS let alone more. But we certainly hear lots of outcries about rorting. And unfortunately, annual plans have now been cut back to quarterly funding periods. That's something that they've done. No one really knows why. It doesn't do anything practical to help anyone in any way that anyone can work out. So where that gold nugget idea came from is anyone's guess, given no one in the sector seems to have been involved in deciding to do it. We see less and less actual planning meetings. No one's actually able to contact an NDIS planner anymore. We find contact numbers of the local NDIS office disappearing in the last 12 months. We can't talk to a local NDIS planner about our plans because we're not allowed to get phone numbers and emails anymore. We all love those no reply possible emails and mobile messages that say we knew that you were in the shower, so we tried to call you, but you can never call us back because we can't leave our phone numbers. So send your message via Raven or Pigeon and we'll get back to you and see what we can do.
Oh my gosh, this all sounds terribly frustrating and I'm imagining heartbreaking, River, for the people who took the time and trouble to make themselves vulnerable to share their stories of abuse and neglect.
Yeah, and it continues on, especially for families and children. We especially just before Christmas, we saw a lot of families shaken up. We heard the NDIS CEO admit what we already knew, which is that planners don't actually read the reports and evidence that people provide, explaining what services they need, which is also tricky when we see families randomly told before Christmas that they had 30 days to provide new reports to say why NDIS shouldn't kick little Johnny off NDIS, not that they read them anyway. And this is also frustratingly odd because we hear more about NDIS in the last 6 months talking about wanting evidence-based services funded only. But now, how do we do that when NDIS doesn't read clinical evidence through professional reports constantly provided? It really is just an enigma.
Now, next week is a big event in the disability sector in that there are up to 10,000 people gathering together to talk about the disability sector. So tell us what's going on, River.
Yep, the biggest event in Australia every year happens over in Perth. It's the Disability Connection Expo sponsored by St Jude's. I'll be there on the ground, engaged with that, delivering a huge event. And the essence of it is that advocates, people with disability, providers, we all agree that we need to work smart instead of hard. We need to stop wasting funding. We need to do actual checks and balances, show basic due diligence through face-to-face, local checks and planning, to ensure education, housing, child safety, mental health, aged care, ageing community services, they all come together and actually communicate. And I think all of us agree that we really need to do this. We need to give it a really red hot go here in Australia by implementing the 222 recommendations of the Disability Royal Commission and the NDIS review. But hey, what would we all know?
When you gather together in those very big numbers, I understand there'll be some government ministers there. So is the Disability Minister likely to come along?
Not the federal representatives. Probably fair enough, though. We've only just kicked off again our new parliament, but we will have some interesting voices of reason. I am able to say we have Pauline Hanson and One Nation attending there to open our event, which will be a lovely conversation starter. We'll have the State Minister for Disability, of course, Hannah, over there in WA, coming along during the day on Friday to talk about what's happening there on the ground. And we have the Opposition Minister, of course, Liam, coming on Saturday to open. We're looking forward, hopefully, for Senator Jordan to come along, visit and engage with that community. And I guess the essence of it is that as a community, we're the ones that need to do the work to fix this cost blowout. It's not going to come from government. And as we've seen, it's not going to come from legislation change.
River, it's always good to get your perspective on this. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It sounds like there's a long road ahead, unfortunately, on rewiring the disability sector.
Yep, and I look forward to seeing everyone in Perth next week.
River Knight on ABC Radio Queensland from Developing Australian Communities, disability advocate. And why do we have royal commissions, I guess, is the big question if the government isn't going to implement the recommendations, Tessa Mapstone?
Yeah, well, I suppose another question is how many of the recommendations is it, within the power of the government to change, and how many, does it come down to industry to look at as well? Maybe it's a collaborative approach, but, it would be a positive thing, to have the accountability there, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because, when royal commissions wrap up and, parliamentary inquiries wrap up, they present their findings and then, there's not really anyone coming back around and going, hey, so how are we going with fixing the problems that we've identified?
Well, you're looking at, the Aboriginal deaths in custody, the recommendations that came out about that in 1991.
That's a really good point, and that is something that we come back to frequently. Going,
time and time again,
we're still not meeting the targets. We're still not fixing the problems,
and we still haven't implemented all of the recommendations. So you're right; it could be a combined approach. But gee, when it does often feel with these things that everything's just going too slow, and especially when people make themselves so vulnerable. Those stories were harrowing out of that
Absolutely.
commission.
Yeah. And, the time investment and the personal cost invested in sharing that and reliving that, and the financial cost of running the inquiries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge.
It's worth making the changes, I reckon.